Alright, welcome back to another video where I try to build out characters for Marvel Rivals. In this case, previously we did a support video. This time we're doing tanks. So unlike the original tank video, this time around I will only be covering 3 tanks instead of like the 15 plus that I did for the original tank video. And that's just because I actually want to sit down and kind of go over each one of the tank's abilities, their passives, maybe their ult, right? Unique elements of their unique elements of their kit, that kind of thing. So there's only 3 tanks, but we're gonna take our time, go through them, really give them the attention I feel they deserve, and so you can see the vision in my head as to, when I say this person should be a tank, I'm actually giving you their kit, so you can actually see what they would look like if they were a tank. Now, of course, I don't have the ability to like mod and code the game to actually put these characters in the game, so you're gonna have to kind of use your imagination a little bit to see what I'm talking about, or like to visualize it. But with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first added tank, and that is Sentry. So I wanted to start things off with Sentry because 1, he's a flying tank, 2, he's relatively popular, and 3, I think he just kind of looks cool. So that's basically it. That's the only reason why we're starting with him. The game really lacks flying tanks at the moment. Well, it doesn't have any flying tanks outside of like Doctor Strange's ability to fly. So Sentry will be the first perma-fly tank. And I think the way I've designed his kit is balanced around the fact that he has permanent flight. And I've also given him some unique characteristics and abilities that I think are mostly true to his hero fantasy. When you look at him in the comics, we don't really have much showing from him in the MCU, so I'm limited in my knowledge of Sentry. Also, keep in mind that Sentry has a lot of powers, and to actually make his kit in a way where he would be able to utilize all of his powers would be next to impossible. Not because you couldn't actually give him all the abilities, but because it would be impossible to balance all of his abilities. So, what I went with here is kind of what I think NetEase would do if they added him to the game. In the same way that Doctor Strange has a bunch of different spells from the comics that he could utilize, but they really only gave him like 3 spells for his kit. We're kind of working off that logic, right? So we're leaning into some of the few traits that I think are easy to balance around or are fun to play against, and that wouldn't be broken, right? Because I know he can do things like even shapeshift, from what I've been told, and it's like, how do you incorporate that in the game in a way that's not like unbalanced? So this is more of a grounded interpretation of Sentry. Feel free to give me your more extreme or just personal interpretations of how you would design Sentry for this game down in the comments. But without further ado, let's actually talk about Sentry's kit. Alright, so starting things off, Sentry would have roughly 500 to 600 health. I'm not sure. This is balance, right? Let the balance team kind of play around with this. This is going to be the same for basically every tank that we talk about. When it comes to their health, when it comes to their damage, right, how much overshield they get, the duration of their cooldowns, those kinds of things. I'm going to name that information when I can, but just keep in mind that those numbers are not like set in stone, non-negotiable, right? Those are things that could be tweaked, based on the balance of the game. So, alright. Sentry's passive. Sentry takes 5% reduced damage from all sources. This is because, he's supposed to be the kind of answer to Superman from Marvel, so he should be tougher than most, other characters in the Marvel Universe, and to accentuate that, we're going to give him 5% damage reduction. Not to mention that he is a brawl, close-ranged fighter, so that 5% damage reduction is kind of nice, and he's also a flyer, which means, he can't really play natural cover the same way a grounded tank can, because there's very little cover in the air. So, and of course he also needs the front line. So giving him a 5% damage reduction from all sources seems like it's a nice way to like balance the fact that he's going to be kind of out in the open a lot. You could increase this or decrease this where needed, naturally. As for his unique ability, Sentry's unique ability is called Void Curses, or just Void Curse. Sentry does not have an ultimate. Instead, the meter is replaced with a power meter. The power meter starts at 100% and is reduced each time Sentry uses one of his abilities. Dealing damage to enemies generates energy for the power meter. When the power meter is reduced to 0, Sentry will revert to an unpowered state. So this would be a reference to when Sentry fights, I believe, World Breaker Hulk. Again, my knowledge of the comics is fairly limited, so forgive me if I'm getting some of that information wrong. But in one of his fights with Hulk, the two of them end up clashing so hard that it depowers both of them. So Hulk turns back into Bruce Banner, and Sentry reverts to a form where he is not, like, empowered, right? So he's basically like a normal human for the most part. That's what this is kind of playing homage to. The unpowered form has 100 base health and has a small firearm as its weapon. He can transform back into fully powered Sentry when the power meter is filled back up to 100%. The power meter recharges on its own while it's in this form, and dealing damage while in this form will also build the power meter back up. So unlike Hulk, who needs to build, like he needs to deal damage and uses little gamma grenade to really get significant ult charge build so that he can turn back into regular Hulk, this meter would charge much faster on its own, but it would also charge when you deal damage. So it's a way to kind of punish you for using your abilities too much. And also, unlike Hulk, if Sentry takes too much damage and his actual health is reduced to 0, Sentry does not revert back to like his unpowered state. He just dies and goes back to spawn. He only turns into his unpowered state if he runs out of power in the power meter. Now, I'm sure there are going to be some people who don't understand the decision to not give him an ultimate. This will probably make more sense as we go through his abilities, but the idea was basically that, well, one, he's supposed to be like really strong in all moments, so this is a way of like making him feel powerful and making him feel ultimate at all times without just giving him an ult, right? Or giving him like an install or an awakening form like Thor has. Also, I kind of was struggling to come up with an ult for the character, and I felt that this system, one, made him feel more unique and more interesting, and two, just felt more impactful than just giving him like a standard ultimate that would probably just be like a beam or some like really big AoE explosion, or you know what I mean, right? I'm sure people who understand more about Sentry's powers and his lore could come up with an ult that is true to the character, but I feel this design choice again makes him stand out a little bit more. It makes him more interesting to play. Alright, let's talk about his primary fire. So Sentry's primary fire is just a constant string of slow but powerful close-range punches. Think Thing's primary fire, or maybe even Groot's primary fire, except it deals more damage. It's probably a bit faster than Groot's primary fire. It's somewhere between Thing's primary fire and Groot's primary fire. But it's very close range. It's about the range of like Black Panther or Wolverine's melee attacks, but it just deals a bunch of damage. Another way to think about this would be like if you play Overwatch, think Reinhardt's hammer swing. A speed similar to that is maybe more along the lines of what I'm talking about. As for his secondary fire, Sentry has an overhead punch that grounds targets. Flying targets are spiked to the ground, while targets that are on the ground already are incapable of using movement abilities for 1 second after being hit. This ability would have like a 2 to 3 second cooldown. So the idea for this is you can use this ability to, of course, get flying targets out of the air. And if you're unfamiliar with Smash Brothers terminology, spike just means they are sent directly from the air to the ground very, very quickly. The best way I can think about it is think Emma's kick, how she like sends you flying into a wall or something like that. It's that level of speed in terms of like how far you travel and how fast you travel. But you go straight towards the ground. This could be really interesting, and he does it at like an angle, I would imagine, depending on how you're aiming your crosshair and whatnot. But you could do some really interesting stuff here by like angling the spike towards a pit. So like you're in the air fighting an Iron Man, and then you like angle this spike towards a pit and knock him into a pit and kill him off the map. So that's one interesting way you could use this ability that I think would be really fun. As for making it so that it grounds enemies, think about it like they're being dazed, right? Like he's overhead hitting you on the top of the fucking head, and that would probably daze you pretty hard, and you wouldn't really be able to use your movement abilities. Now, you could probably remove the grounding effect on targets on the ground if that's too strong. Sentry really won't be playing on the ground all that often, so I'm totally fine with that. Just something I figured I'd put in there because it adds consistency to his kit. Another thing to note about this ability is that it can be charged. It can also be used in the middle of a combo. So if you're using your primary fire, you can weave this in with your primary fire to have its effect activate. So again, if you're comboing a flyer and you push alt fire in the middle of your combo, you'll just instantly spike them to the ground. You can also, like I said, you can charge it up. So if you charge it, you'll deal even more damage, and you will increase the duration of the grounded effect that you apply to enemies. So again, this is mostly applied to people who are on the ground, but you get the idea. One last thing about the alt fire, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it has like a 2 to 3 second cooldown. Alright, let's get into his abilities. Ability 1 for Sentry is Flying Dash. Sentry dashes in any direction. He does not gain invincibility frames like Star-Lord does. This is just a simple dash. Think Tracer Blink, right? I don't think Tracer has invulnerability when she uses her blinks. This dash uses 10% of the power meter, but it doesn't have a cooldown. So unlike Tracer, you can spam this as much as you want, up to 10 times, right? Because you only have 100% on the meter, and it uses 10% each time. If the dash button is held down after being used, Sentry will enter fast flight mode. So, while in fast flight mode, Sentry flies at about the same speed as Iron Man during his fast flight mode. This mode consumes 2% of the ult meter every 0.5 seconds, so about 4% every second. Pressing and holding the alternate fire button will enter into a charged flight mode. While Sentry is in charged flight mode, Sentry increases his flight speed even further, probably close to like 10% more, and gains the ability to pin a single target he comes in contact with while flying. You consume an additional 10% of the power meter per second while this mode is in use, and pinned targets are stunned while pinned. If Sentry collides with a surface, while he has an enemy pinned, the enemy takes 100 damage and are freed from the pin effect. So the idea behind this is, like, you're flying, you enter fast flight mode, you activate charged flight mode, and then you run into, like, a flying enemy or an enemy that just used, like, a jump ability or a movement ability, right? And you would basically grab them in the same way that Wolverine can kind of grab people with his leap ability, or in the same way that Hulk stuns people in the air when he uses his jump ability on them. Now, originally I had the idea that if you fly through a breakable surface, the pin effect does not end. So you just take damage and you remain pinned. You don't lose the pin effect on the enemy until you come in contact with a non-breakable surface. Now, something that could maybe make this a little busted is the fact that, you know, this only consumes, 10% of the power meter. So you could technically kidnap someone and just hold on to them for 10 seconds, right? Or really it's less than that. It's really more like 5 or 6 seconds. And that might not be the most fun thing to play against, but also keep in mind that Sentry can't use any of his other abilities while he's in this state, so you are kind of vulnerable. But at the same time, it, again, can get kind of toxic if, say, the only person left on the enemy team is like a tank, and you just pick the tank up and just fly him around for 6 seconds and then kill him, right? Like, that's a pretty significant way to stagger the enemy team. But maybe that contributes to Sentry's skill ceiling. I don't know. You kind of gotta let me know what you think about that in the comment section down below. But let's move on to his next ability. Ability 2 is Laser Eyes. You pretty much should have seen this one coming a mile away. A simple long-ranged beam attack. The attack pierces enemies and has a slow travel speed. The speed is similar to like Squirrel Girl projectiles, maybe a little slower. It has high damage and consumes somewhere between like 10% and 15% of the power meter, and has a 5-second cooldown. Can be used while in all flight modes, so you could pick someone up and like pin them and hit them with Laser Eyes at the same time to deal a bunch of burst damage. Now again, this sounds kind of powerful on paper, but you have to remember that you have this resource to contend with, right? You don't have unlimited uses of these abilities. You have to play around your power meter. So, you know, you could dump all of your power into killing a single target, but then you're going to be, you know, reduced to your unpowered state, and you're going to leave your team vulnerable. So, just, you know, stuff to think about. Keep him balanced in that way. Next up is Ability 3, Energy Absorb. Sentry raises his arm outward and absorbs projectile damage, converting it into energy for the power meter. Sentry can press the Alt Fire button to grab a nearby enemy. You know, they have to be in close proximity, so melee range. And he will drain life from them and convert that life into energy for his power meter. This is on a 30-second cooldown, so it's not something that can be spammed. The idea for this is, of course, Sentry needs a way to get some of his power meter back. This is that. Again, think of this kind of similar to like Sigma Grasp, although I think Sigma Grasp is on a much lower cooldown. But because this can also be used offensively, that's why it's on a much longer cooldown. After Ability 3 is Ability 4, Too Tough to Handle. Sentry enters an awakened state that makes him immune to all damage, consumes 25% of the power meter to activate, and drains the meter by an additional 15% for every second that it's held down. Sentry cannot attack while in this state. So again, Sentry is kind of like the Superman of the Marvel Universe. I know that there are other heroes that kind of also fill that role, but we want to emphasize the fact that he should feel damn near invulnerable, right? And this is a way, I think, of adding that fantasy to the hero's kit without making him super broken, right? Like, because if he just had it, it's a way of like giving you that state without, just making him permanently taking 15% less damage, right? So to elaborate on this ability even more, this basically functions like Loki totems, except it can't be broken, right? He is just invincible for that 25%, or the however long he does this for, right? If he holds the button down, he is just invincible during the duration of that. You can't stop it, right? Now maybe he could be CC'd out of it, like if you had a specific grab, like Emma grab could CC him out of it, or maybe something like Hulk's ultimate grab could CC him out of it. But general attacks just do not have any effect on him while he's in this state. Again, this one could be kind of broken. Maybe you balance this more similar to like Ramatra Block from Overwatch, where it's like you take 80% reduced damage, but you still take damage. Maybe you could do something where it's like, while this is active, it drains the meter, but also based on the amount of damage that he takes, it drains the meter even faster. Stuff to play around with, stuff to keep in mind, but generally speaking, you don't want to give him too many downsides, because again, he's a resource management character. You mess around with that a little too much and he becomes unplayable, so just stuff to keep in mind when actually building out his kit. And that's Sentry. Again, I didn't want to give him too many abilities. I didn't want to give him too much stuff in his kit. I think, honestly, between like his flight abilities, his different flying states, his mobility, the damage that he would do, and his ability to basically be invulnerable for a few seconds, I think that's more than enough to make him a viable tank, because he would be able to take space, he'd be able to pressure people out with offensive abilities. He has a long-range poke ability as well. Like, I think his kit is fine here, right? Like, you could probably do more with it, but giving him too much, again, I think would make him broken and make him unfun to play against. And I think even just some of these abilities that I named are kind of unfun to play against. But I think the trade-off is he does not have a big, flashy ultimate, so giving him more powerful neutral game, I think, is a good trade-off for that. But let me know what you think of my idea for Sentry down in the comments below, and let's move on to the next hero or villain that will be added to the roster. Alright, moving right along, we have Sabretooth. This one, Sabretooth was one of the most requested villains that should be added as a tank, and I 100% agree. After doing some like research into some of his powers and abilities and some of like his history and whatnot, I think he would be not only one of the cooler tanks to add, but I think he'd be an interesting take on like the kind of dive melee tank that we already kind of have with like Venom. So the design philosophy I had when creating his kit was, think of this as like Venom, Captain America, and Wolverine kind of blended together into one hero. And I think I actually made something kind of fun. So let's go over it. Sabretooth has somewhere between 500 and 600 health. Can't decide. Balanced team, figure it out. His size should be bigger than Wolverine. That's it. I don't know how big you would make him. I don't know the details, but he should be bigger than Wolverine. If he's smaller than Wolverine, that's a problem, because he's bigger than Wolverine in the comics. As for his passive is called Feral Bloodlust. As Sabretooth deals damage, he builds up a Bloodlust meter from 0 to 100 and gains 5% damage reduction. I'm sorry, he gains 0.5% damage reduction per level of Bloodlust generated. So it maxes out at 50% damage reduction. The reason for this is that Sabretooth does not have a damage mitigation ability, right? So he doesn't have a block or anything like that. He's just kind of face tanking the whole game. Kind of like a Thing. Bloodlust is generated by dealing damage and decays over time if Sabretooth is not dealing damage. Dealing damage to targets while at 100% Bloodlust will apply the Wounded effect to targets. Wounded targets receive reduced healing. If Sabretooth kills a wounded target, he gains Overshield. Wounded duration is unknown. It would likely be like 1 to 2 seconds stacking. So like the more times you apply Wounded, it increases to maybe like a maximum of 5 to 10 seconds, something like that. Overshield amount is also unknown. I'm probably thinking around like 100, 150 Overshield. That might be too much. That might be too little. Venom gets like 600 Overshield when he's like at like 10% health. So I don't know, right? Again, balance team, figure it out. So the idea for this is Sabretooth is known for being very feral, I guess is the word that I would use. He's an animal, right? Like he tears people apart. If you see some of his like old comics where he fights Wolverine, they're like disemboweling each other, right, tearing chunks off of each other. It's really like gruesome stuff, honestly. But you want to like you want to capture that in the character's kit, and I think kind of capturing the level of carnage that Sabretooth inflicts upon enemies is done through the wounded effect, right? So he's tearing chunks out of your flesh, which makes it hard for your supports to heal you. That's kind of the idea behind the wounded effect. As for his primary fire, it's just a short-ranged claw swipe, similar to Wolverine's primary fire. So it's maybe not a 3-hit primary fire like Wolverine's combo, maybe just like a continuous slashing of the claws would be more than enough. There is no ult fire, because just like Wolverine doesn't have an ult fire. Most of the melee heroes don't really have ult fires, so neither does Sabretooth. Sorry. Ability 1 is Feral Sprint. Sabretooth enters an enhanced speed state similar to Captain America's Sprint. I was thinking something more like he's on all fours running at you, but I don't really know if he actually runs like that in the comics, so, maybe not. You know what I mean? He's sprinting at you, he's running at you, he's gonna mess you up. While in this state, he can run up and on walls. Pressing the attack button while in the state performs a dashing attack that lunges forward and pierces through enemies. So again, think kind of similar to Black Panther, who can dash through enemies. This allows you to do that while you are in the sprinting state. Ability 2 is Feral Leap. Sabretooth leaps towards a targeted enemy. Think Things Leap, but it has the same properties as Hulk's midair stun. So if you hit someone in the air, it's going to stun them out of the air, and you're going to drag them down out of the air, just like Hulk's stun, or just like Wolverine's grab. However, if they're on the ground, you don't actually drag them or anything like that. The distance this leap can travel increases based on the amount of bloodlust Sabretooth has generated. It has 2 charges and is on a 3-second cooldown for each charge. So this has tracking similar to Iron Fist's primary fire. And the length, right, the radius of that tracking is increased based on his bloodlust meter, right? So you'll be able to hit people from much further away with this leap, the more bloodlust you have built up. His third ability is Feral Fury. Sabretooth enters a state similar to Thing's Charge, only he's slashing wildly at opponents that get in his path. This state applies wounded to targets hit and increases Sabretooth's movement speed. So the idea behind this is just like charging in, swinging. If you think like Wolverine after he does his leap and he goes into that rapid swinging state, Sabretooth is basically doing that, but he's charging at the enemy team like Thing would, right? And he's like running through people, so he doesn't get like CC'd while in this state. Now maybe you let him get CC'd. I thought about maybe giving this ability the ability to like deflect projectiles or destroy projectiles, but I think his kit is maybe more balanced around him not having a block ability. So I was a little iffy on that. If he would be too weak without that block ability, go ahead and add the block effect to this ability, and I think that makes him much stronger. Alright, let's talk about his ult. Unrestrained Bloodlust. Sabretooth enters an awakened state for a short time. Think around as long as Hulk's ult, and during this time he moves 10% faster, he deals 10% more damage, and he has no cooldown on any of his abilities. While in this state, his primary fire has slightly increased range and applies wounded to targets. So this is just like a berserk feral mode where you can spam all of your abilities. You're applying wounded to everybody, so everybody's taking reduced healing. You're generating a bunch of overshield because you're getting kills from the people who are taking reduced healing, right? You just feel like Sabretooth going crazy, and you're at like max bloodlust, and you're just ripping people apart and having a good time. I think this would be the most fun way to design his ult. Of course, you could give him an ult similar to like Wolverine, where he does like a single combo and does like big damage. But again, I think this would be the most fun. I think giving him like more mobility and more lethality makes him more fun to play as a tank. And again, he's more or less going to be used as like a dive tank, or if you play something like Junker Queen in Overwatch, you can think of him somewhat similarly to that, where he's just kind of in your face at all times, like dealing damage on the front line, just messing people up and having a good time while doing it. And that's Sabretooth. Again, let me know what you think of the design. I think he would be probably the most fun tank to play, especially since I love playing Hulk. I like playing melee heroes. Well, specifically, I like playing the melee tanks. And making a high lethal, highly mobile main tank that just brawls people and doesn't really have like the block, he's more like a glass cannon kind of build, I think would be really sick and really fun. But let's move on to the final tank of the video, one that is probably the most highly requested, and one whose kit I probably had the most fun making. So here we go. The final tank of the video is Ghost Rider himself. Ghost Rider has 500 HP, and he has the incredible passive, Seeker of Vengeance. This passive makes him gain additional ult charge for dealing damage to enemies with the highest number of kills. It's roughly 10% extra ult charge is what I'm thinking. So basically, when you kill an enemy who has the highest kills in the lobby, you instantly get 10% on your ult charge. Ghost Rider's unique ability is called Hot Ride. Ghost Rider can summon his bike to alter his moveset and abilities. Bike mode has its own health pool, around 400 HP, and the bike can be destroyed if it takes too much damage, reverting Ghost Rider back to his normal state. Ghost Rider's primary fire is a whip, which is his chain, where he whips the chain at enemies, applying burn damage to targets hit. The chain has a range that is something like short or mid-range, somewhere around like 20 meters, right? I think is reasonable. As for his alt fire, Ghost Rider's chain separates into multiple sections that are sent out in a short-ranged cluster. Targets hit take burn damage for a short time. This has a very wide shotgun spread range. It has low pellet damage and is extremely lethal at close range. So, again, this would probably be like a 10-meter range for this, but the spread would be pretty massive, even larger than like Punisher's spread. So you basically just, but it would shoot more pellets than Punisher's spread, right? So you would just walk up to a tank like Hulk and Thing, and you just hit them with this, and it just like chunks like 1/4 of their health bar instantly, and they get hit with like burn effect. As for ability one is Chain/Hook. Ghost Rider sends his chain out towards an enemy. Targets hit take burst damage and are burned for a short duration. However, if the target is already burned or already on fire, when they are hit by this attack, they are pulled to Ghost Rider's location. This has an 8-second cooldown. So the idea behind this is like, if you would use this in like a combo, right? So unlike Emma, who activates Diamond Form and like grabs you, right? She lunges forward to grab you. On Ghost Rider, you would use your whip attack, apply like your primary fire to apply burn to a target, and then you would instantly cancel the animation of that primary fire with this ability 1 to hit them with the chain lash. And because they're on fire from the primary fire's secondary ability that sets them on fire, you pull them in towards you. That's how the hook would work here. So you still have kind of a window as the enemy player to avoid getting hooked, right? Or avoid getting pulled in by Ghost Rider. It's more like a timing thing for the Ghost Rider player or a skill shot for the Ghost Rider player. Of course, if you're like moving around a lot too, it's not something that can just instantly happen. So I wanted to avoid the frustration of Roadhog players, like, or playing against Roadhog in Overwatch, where you're just, walking and then you just get pulled into a Roadhog and die. I wanted to kind of avoid that. You want to avoid stuff that doesn't have counterplay options, but I think this is fine for the most part. He's gonna have a pull. You have to give him the ability to pull people into him, right? It's just, how do you do it in a way that doesn't feel too bad for the person on the enemy team? That's all. Alright, let's move on to a secondary ability. Ability 2 is Hellfire Spit. Ghost Rider spits Hellfire out in a stream. Targets hit are burned for a long duration, and the flames linger on the field for a specific amount of time, burning enemies that come in contact. Can be used on a hooked target to spit fire directly onto them, dealing massive damage and burning them. The cooldown is about 10 seconds. So the idea behind this is, of course, you would set someone on fire, hook, pull them into you, and then just after you pull them into you, if you push ability 2, you will enter a special animation where Ghost Rider sets them on fire. Just a single target set them on fire. So he doesn't get to apply it to a specific area like he could if he used Hellfire Spit by himself. It's just to this one person. And again, this would do like massive damage. I couldn't tell you how much, but I would imagine if you did this to a squishy, they would probably just instantly die, right? Or they would die from the effects of the burn damage over time, if they did not receive healing. So, Ghost Rider's third ability is the one that I'm sure everyone's been waiting on. It's Time to Ride. Ghost Rider summons his bike and gains increased movement speed and altered abilities. This has a 60-second cooldown, but dealing damage with burn reduces this cooldown. So, if you're applying burn to targets for every second that they're taking burn damage, your cooldown will go down by that second, right? So it's not too bad. It sounds long on paper, but it's not as bad as you might think. While you are in Time to Ride, while you're riding Ghost Rider's bike, he can ride on walls, he can ride up walls, however he cannot ride on the ceiling, so you can just go up walls or onto them and like ride on the side of the walls. There's more to it than that, but we'll get into it while we talk about the abilities that change while you're on the bike. So, speaking of which, Ghost Rider's primary fire changes while he is on the bike. It changes to a simple whip slash that hits enemies in a horizontal spread in front of you. This is kind of hard to express just through words, but think like he's swiping the chain horizontally in front of him and like hitting people that are directly to the side of him and in front of him, right? So it's going in like almost a quarter circle motion, if that makes sense. Or maybe even a full half circle, right? Depending on how you want to do the animation. But this is relatively slow. It's not like really fast or anything like that, but it can pierce targets, so it hits a bunch of enemies at one time, and it applies burn to them. Ghost Rider's alt fire while he's on the bike causes him to spin the chain in front of him, blocking incoming damage and dealing damage to targets hit by the chain. Targets hit by the chain are burned for a short period of time, and this is on a 12-second cooldown. So this is his block, right? This is his damage mitigation ability while he's on the bike. Ghost Rider's ability 1 changes as well while he's on the bike. It changes to whip shot slash drag you down, a whip attack with his chain that applies burn to targets and knocks them backwards. So this is literally just Brigida's whip shot from Overwatch 1, only it applies burn to the targets after they're hit. Targets that are already suffering from burn when hit by this attack are instead dragged behind Ghost Rider's bike for a short time. The cooldown on this is roughly 8 seconds. So the time that they are dragged for, I couldn't tell you. Probably something like 3 seconds. Kind of hard to say. This aspect of the kit would probably be removed just because it's not fun to get CC'd. It's not fun to get dragged around, right, and displaced like that if you're on the receiving end of this ability. But if you're the Ghost Rider player, this is a pretty fun ability to use, and I would imagine it would look pretty sick. The netcode would probably disagree with me on this one, but I don't know. I think it would be cool, so that's why I put it in there. Ghost Rider's ability 2 while on the bike is called Wheelie. Ghost Rider charges his bike with Hellfire Flames, granting him shields that decay over time, and the ability to fly while riding the bike for a short time. The flight's duration is about 5 seconds, and this ability is on a 15-second cooldown. Now, when I say that he has the ability to fly, think very similarly to like Star-Lord flight instead of something like Iron Man flight. Unless you're thinking of Iron Man's fast flight mode, which is probably closer to the speed that I would give this flight ability. Ability 3 while on the bike is simply called Dismount. Ghost Rider jumps off of his bike. That's it. And it goes on cooldown. Nothing more needs to be said. Just in case you want to cancel the bike ability early, you can do so. Don't really know why you would do that because it gives you extra health, but still. Alright, time for my favorite part of Ghost Rider's kit, which is his ultimate. You all know what this is if you know Ghost Rider. Come on, what else is it? It's the Pin and Stare. Of course it's the Pin and Stare. So let's talk about how I implemented it. The idea is Ghost Rider stops moving and stuns every enemy in his line of sight for 1 second with a max range of 45 meters. So you have to be kind of close to him. The idea is that you have to be you have to be in a distance where you could see his eyes, right? Targets that are stunned take 25% of their total health in burn damage over the course of 3 seconds, plus an additional 2% of their total health for every kill and assist they have. There is no cap on this percentage. So the idea here is that so Ghost Rider's entire character is like, I punish people who do wrong, right? Like I'm vengeance incarnate, right? I'm here to punish the people who have committed crimes against innocent people. In this case, innocent people are the people on your team if you're Ghost Rider. So, the more times the enemy have killed your teammates, the more effective Ghost Rider's Pin and Stare becomes, right? So he's more effective the longer the fight, the longer the game drags out, or he is more effective against single carrying DPSs, right? This is a good way as a tank if you want to, make it so that a DPS that's carrying the enemy team doesn't have as much fun. Pin and Stare is a real easy way to really, cuck them over, because you're going to do the most damage with your Pin and Stare against this single person. So you don't even have to fish for a whole team wipe ult with Pin and Stare. You can just straight use it on this single person, and they will almost certainly die damn near instantly with 3 seconds of their total HP pool being reduced or being burned away. Now, originally I had this ult percentages set to like 25%. So you lose 25% of your health on cast if you're hit by it. You are guaranteed to lose 25% of your health over the course of 3 seconds. and then you would lose an additional 25% for every 10 kills that you have, or 10 assists that you have. I changed that because that makes, like, the mid fight, basically, you don't gain any benefits for using this if the person has 10 kills versus 19 kills, right? And that doesn't feel as good as increasing it slowly over time with, you know, a percentage that applies per kill. So it has a lower initial a lower initial damage value, but a higher potential damage value, and a higher potential damage value during, like, the mid stages of the game. Now, the reason why I also went with assists here is because supports, right? This ability also really hurts supports because some supports have very high assists. You know, like Ultron tends to have high assists, Mantis tends to have high assists, Cloak and Dagger tend to have high assists. So you can really mess over the enemy team's supports if you hit them with this as well. It's not just targeted at the DPS. Also, the idea, like, the rationality behind that is you're an accomplice to these murders, right? You helped with these murders, so you're just as guilty as the person who committed the murders directly. But that's Ghost Rider. Again, let me know what you would do for Ghost Rider's kit down below. Let me know what you think of my concept for his pin and stare. Let me know what you think about, like, how the bike works, if there's other ways you would have done his bike. Let me know if there's other ways you would have done his primary fire and whatnot. And of course, as always, please let me know if you have any other recommendations for tanks. I have like 3 more videos planned for tanks that I want to see added to the game. Honestly, it's probably more than that, just because of all of the recommendations that you guys have been giving me. I've been kind of on my grind looking through Marvel comics and history and researching the different heroes, because again, I want to make these heroes both fun to play and true to their hero fantasy and true to their hero identity. So thank you all for watching. I'm sorry that this one took so much longer to come out than the last one. I actually got sick in between the Thanos video and this one, so that's what the delay was. But hopefully we're back on the grind, and we should be putting these out faster than, you know, a week in between videos. But anyway, like I said, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Hope to see you in the next one.